My name is Natalie Carter, 33 years old, and for more than a decade, I carried my family's weight on my back. I worked double shifts in the ER, paid their bills when they fell behind, and even left my credit card saved on the family's account because they said it was easier that way. I told myself it was love that sacrifice meant belonging. But 2 days before Christmas, a single message lit up our group chat announcing to 30 relatives that my fiancé and I were no longer welcome at the family dinner. No explanation, no hesitation, just erasure. In that moment, every late night and every dollar I had poured into them turned sour. They expected me to swallow the humiliation and quietly pay for their luxury holiday booked under my name. What they never imagined was that I would take back control and their $15,000 dream vacation would become the stage for my quiet revenge. Snow was falling so hard it blurred the streetlights into pale halos as I stepped out of the hospital on December 22nd. 12 hours in the ER had left my body heavy, my hair damp with sweat under my wool cap, my scrubs hidden beneath a thick coat that could not keep the exhaustion from sinking into my bones. I pushed open the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and for a brief moment, I let the silence settle. Then my phone vibrated against the console. At first I thought it was a message from a patient or a reminder for my next shift. But when I glanced down, the group chat that carried the Carter family name lit the screen. A message from my mother sat in bold at the bottom. Christmas dinner this year is for real family only. There will be no place for you and Mark. My breath caught in my throat. The words glowed like ice, sharp and merciless. I blinked thinking maybe I misread. But the thread was full of little reactions from cousins and aunts, a stream of thumbs up and hearts, as if my erasure was a joke worth celebrating. 30 relatives had seen it, and not one spoke up. Mark opened the passenger door, snow clinging to his dark curls. He tossed his gloves on the dash, laughing about the storm, until he saw my face. His smile faltered. What happened? I turned the phone so he could read. His eyes moved across the words, then froze. Are you serious? My mother. I whispered the words like they could still disappear if I said them softly. Mark shook his head slowly, his mouth parting in disbelief. The car filled with the sound of the heater humming and the faint rush of wind against the glass. My chest tightened. For years I had held that family together during the holidays. I covered the light bill when the decorations threatened to go dark. I ordered trays of food so no one would leave hungry. I bought gifts for nieces and nephews when their own parents claimed money was tight. Every December I told myself if I gave enough, if I worked the extra shifts and skipped the celebrations at my friends' houses, maybe my parents would finally see me. Maybe they would say thank you. Instead, 2 days before Christmas, they carved me out like I was nothing. I scrolled back through the thread. A cousin had posted a string of champagne emojis. My uncle typed, "Can't wait to see everyone." No one asked where I was, why my name was missing. It was as if I had never been part of them at all. Mark reached across the console and took my hand, his palm warm despite the cold air seeping through the windows. Nat, this is insane. We should call them. We should demand an explanation. I shook my head. The thought of dialing my mother's number and hearing her measured tone, that clipped politeness she used when she wanted to slice me without raising her voice, made my stomach churn. Outside, snow piled against the curb, muffling the city into silence. I stared at the windshield, the wipers smearing white into streaks. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. All those nights I walked out of this hospital with aching feet, telling myself the sacrifices meant something, because I was building a family that cared. And in one sentence they erased it. I tried to imagine the dinner without me. My father carving the roast, my mother pouring wine, Sophia, my younger sister basking in the glow of their attention in her new red dress. They would raise glasses to each other while my name was unspoken. The picture was so vivid it stung. Mark's voice broke through. We don't have to sit here and take this. We can make other plans. His jaw tightened in a way I had only seen a few times when he felt something was deeply wrong. I nodded faintly, but words would not come. The phone buzzed again, another notification. Another relative chiming in with excitement about the big night, I turned the screen face down. The heater rattled, then settled into a low hum. Snowflakes tapped against the windshield, melting into trails of water. In that quiet, I felt something colder than the storm seep into me. Not just hurt, but recognition. A lifetime of being the one who paid, the one who filled in the gaps, the one who swallowed her disappointment so the evening would run smoothly, had led me here to this moment in a car outside the hospital, erased from the table I had helped set year after year. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. For the first time, I let the truth sink in fully. No matter how much I gave, they would never see me. And for the first time, a different thought sparked beneath the ache, a thought that felt dangerous and steady all at once. Maybe I did not need to beg for a place at their table anymore. The light at the intersection ahead turned red, glowing through the blur of snow, and I sat there in the stillness, heart heavy. The decision of what to do next, pressing closer with every breath. Memories began to rise like a tide I could not stop. Sitting at that red light with snow thick on the windshield, I saw myself 5 years earlier at Sophia's engagement dinner. I had covered the entire bill from the caterer to the linen rentals, yet, when I arrived, the only seat left for me was shoved at a tiny table near the restroom door. I sat alone, the sound of flushing toilets behind me, while my sister's friends clinked glasses in the glow of candlelight. Not once did anyone mention my name or thank me for footing the cost. When I smiled politely at my mother across the room, she looked away as if I were a stranger. The images shifted further back to my senior year of high school. I had won a full scholarship to the University of Colorado, something that should have been celebrated. Instead, the savings I had scraped together from part-time shifts at a diner went to cover Sophia's ballet lessons. She was the chosen one, the one my parents called the future. I remember overhearing my father bragging to neighbors about her performances while never once mentioning the letter of acceptance that had felt like a lifeline to me. Years blurred into the same rhythm. I worked nights, doubled shifts, and every time a bill came due for the Carter house, the responsibility landed on me. By the time I was 25, my name was on the family credit card, not because I wanted it, but because no one else was willing to take the risk. They called it convenience. To me, it was a leash. I paid off utilities, medical expenses, even Sophia's car insurance when she conveniently forgot. At the hospital, I was saving lives, calming frantic families pushing through exhaustion, and yet at home, all I heard from my mother was a flat dismissal. Nursing is not much of a career, Natalie. Anybody can do that. Those words sank deeper than I admitted at the time. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel and let the heater blow hot air across my cheeks. I typed into the group chat once. The words burned on the screen. After everything I have done for this family, this is how you treat me. My thumb hovered over send. I could almost hear my mother's clipped voice scolding me for making a scene. Don't be dramatic. It is just dinner. I deleted the message before it could travel through the thread. My silence had always been easier for them. Mark shifted beside me, watching carefully. You want to say something, don't you? I nodded but kept my lips pressed shut. If I spoke, the hurt would spill out in a flood. I thought of birthdays where I waited by the window for a call that never came, of Christmas mornings where my gifts were practical socks while Sophia unwrapped jewelry. Those slights had collected like stones in my chest, and now the weight threatened to crush me. Outside the windshield, the light turned green, but I did not press the gas. My eyes burned with unshed tears. I felt invisible, but also something else stirring beneath the pain, a quiet heat that made my pulse quicken. It was the realization that maybe I had let them erase me for too long. Mark touched my arm gently. We could leave the city for Christmas, just the two of us. His voice was steady, full of loyalty. I wanted to agree to run, but I knew it was not that simple. My parents had always expected me to carry the burden quietly, and now they expected me to disappear the same way. Snow piled against the hood of the car, and I gripped the steering wheel again. I thought of the years of being treated like background, the dependable older daughter who could be used without thanks. Something inside me hardened. For the first time, I did not just feel wounded. I felt the first sparks of defiance, I put the car in gear and pulled away from the intersection, my mind already racing toward what I would discover next, something that would make me realize silence was no longer an option. Mark sat beside me in the dim car, the rhythm of the wipers cutting through the silence. He reached for my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles like he could smooth away the hurt. "We are getting married in the spring," he said quietly. "Do not let them ruin that for us." I wanted to believe him, to hold on to that promise of a day that belonged only to us, but the echoes of my family's words kept rising. My father once muttered that Mark was not good enough for the Carters. My mother told me flatly that a daughter like me would never have a wedding worth remembering. And Sophia, always sharp with her tongue, had typed into the family chat just weeks earlier that no one would bother showing up to my ceremony anyway. I stared at the road ahead, the lines barely visible beneath the snow. Their voices blended with the sound of the storm drilling into me until my chest ached. Mark squeezed my hand tighter. "Nat," he whispered, "they are wrong. You know that, right?" I nodded, but the bitterness still pressed heavy. Later that night, when we finally made it back to the apartment, Mark kicked off his boots and slumped onto the couch. I dropped my coat over a chair and grabbed my phone. It was buzzing again with notifications. Against my better judgment, I opened Facebook. My mother's profile picture had changed to a snapshot of her and Sophia in front of a sparkling tree. Below it sat a new album labeled Palm Springs Holiday. I clicked. Photo after photo showed the resort lit with golden lights, palm trees wrapped in garlands, Sophia holding a cocktail by the pool in a red dress that shimmered in the sun. At first I felt the familiar sting of exclusion, that icy reminder that they had carved me out of every memory worth keeping. Then my eyes landed on the caption beneath one of the photos. "Reservation confirmed under Natalie Carter." My name sitting there in bold letters like a scar across the screen. My breath hitched. I clicked back to the album, scanned through the images again, and there it was a second time. In one photo of the hotel lobby, Linda had tagged herself in a comment thanking staff for arranging upgrades, then wrote thanks to Natalie's profile. Everything went through smoothly. I felt my pulse surge. Mark leaned forward, catching my expression. "What is it?" I turned the phone toward him. His eyes narrowed, then widened. "They used your profile," he said slowly. "That family travel account you set up years ago." I swallowed hard. In 2021, I had built that profile to help book one of Sophia's failed graduation trips. My card had been stored on file ever since. I had meant to delete it, but never did, too tired and distracted to clean up their mess. Now here it was haunting me. Mark rubbed his forehead. "This is not a mistake. They knew exactly what they were doing." His words hit me like a blow. $15,000, maybe more, all attached to my name. My family had not only banned me from Christmas dinner, but had saddled me with the bill for their luxury holiday. I set the phone down on the coffee table, my hands trembling. It was humiliation stacked on betrayal. They had erased me from their table and still expected me to pay for the feast. My throat tightened, but beneath the hurt, another feeling stirred sharper, hotter. Anger began to eclipse the shame. For so long, I had been the one who stayed quiet, who let them drain me and smiled through it. But staring at my name on that invoice, I knew the silence was over. Mark's voice broke through the storm of my thoughts. "What are we going to do?" I met his eyes steady for the first time that night. "Something is about to change," I said, "and this time, they will not see it coming." I waited until Mark fell asleep on the couch before I opened my laptop. My hands shook as I typed in the login for the travel agency portal. The screen flickered, then loaded, and there it was, the confirmation page. My name sat at the top in bold letters. Primary contact, Natalie Carter. Beneath it, the last 4 digits of my card glared back at me like a warning. The balance was nearly $15,000. My stomach lurched. For a second, all I could think was, cancel now, shut it down before it drains everything. I hovered over the cancel button, my pulse racing. Images of the family laughing in Palm Springs without me crowded my head. My throat closed. They had cut me out of dinner, but left my name stamped on their luxury. My phone buzzed on the table. At first I thought it was Mark, but the caller ID flashed Uncle Robert. I answered, whispering hello. His voice was calm, deliberate, the way only a man who had spent decades in courtrooms could sound. I saw the Facebook post. He paused. They used your account, didn't they? I swallowed hard. Yes. 15,000. He exhaled through the line. Listen carefully. You are the primary on that contract. That means you hold the rights. You can change the reservation, alter the guests, even occupy the suite yourself. It is legal. Do not let them make you believe otherwise. For a moment I could not speak. All my life I had been taught to hand over control, to let others dictate the story. Now someone was telling me I had the power. Robert's words lit something in me, a spark in the dark. My fingers moved away from the cancel button. Instead, I clicked on Modify Reservation. The options opened like doors. Dates, names, room types, all of it under my authority. Mark stirred awake and came to sit beside me. What did Robert say? I turned the screen toward him. It is mine. All of it. The suite in Palm Springs, the flights, the holiday package. Every charge is tied to me, which means I can take it. He leaned back, a slow smile forming. Then we go. The idea settled over me like a cloak. Revenge without screaming justice, without chaos. They had expected me to pay silently. Instead, I would enjoy the very thing they tried to steal. My humiliation began to harden into resolve. For once, I would not be erased. I clicked confirm on the modifications, typing in our names as the guests. The screen updated reservation complete. I stared at the new itinerary, my heart pounding in my ears. Mark wrapped his arm around my shoulders. They will never see it coming, he said, and I let myself believe it. For the first time in years, I shut the laptop without fear. The snow outside still fell thick, blanketing the streets, but inside, I felt a clarity I had never known. I was done letting them dictate who I was. This Christmas would not be theirs to boast about. It would be mine to reclaim. What I did not realize yet was how much louder the fallout would echo once they discovered where their holiday dreams had gone. The morning of Christmas Eve broke gray and heavy, the storm still pressing against the city. I woke to the quiet hum of the radiator and the weight of a decision that no longer felt fragile. The night before, I had sealed it with a single click. Now it was time to act. I sat on the edge of the bed, typed out a quick email to the hospital requesting emergency leave. My fingers did not hesitate, though a faint guilt flickered. Someone else would cover the shift, but this was the first holiday in my adult life that would not be spent saving others while my own family treated me like a shadow. Mark emerged from the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee. He set mine on the nightstand and kissed the top of my head. We are really doing this, Nat. His voice carried both excitement and defiance. I nodded and opened the closet. The sound of the zipper slicing open the suitcase felt final. I folded sweaters, packed jeans, slid my passport into the side pocket. Each item felt like proof that I was walking away from a role I had never chosen. By mid-morning, the snow had thickened, muffling the city into silence. Mark logged into his rewards account, eyes bright. I just upgraded us. A suite overlooking the mountains. He glanced at me quickly. No changes to the contract, just the perks. I smiled for the first time in days. Even the upgrade felt like a small rebellion wrapped in legitimacy. As I tucked my gloves into the bag, my phone lit up with a call from Aunt Margaret. Her name always softened me. I answered, my voice low. She didn't waste time. I saw what happened in the group chat. Natalie, you are not wrong. They have treated you like a fire extinguisher all your life, to be broken out when there is trouble. Her voice cracked. But it is time to let them burn. Tears pressed at the corners of my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. She sighed, as if she had carried the same wound for years. Take your holiday, sweetheart. You deserve it. We loaded the car just after noon, the wheels crunching against ice. I glanced once at the familiar skyline, feeling the city recede like a chapter closing. At the Carter house across town, I imagined my parents bustling in the kitchen pots clanging, Sophia twirling in her red dress before a mirror, none of them suspecting the rug had been pulled out beneath their holiday. At Denver International, the terminal buzzed with stranded travelers, families wrapped in scarves, children dragging stuffed animals. Mark and I moved quietly through the chaos, our boarding passes glowing on the screen. The snow pelted the windows, but the plane was still on schedule. My heart raced with each step toward security. For years, every holiday had been tethered to obligation to duty, to swallowing pain. Now I was stepping into something that felt foreign and powerful. As the TSA agent scanned my ID, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was real. We found our gate and dropped into the plastic chairs, the smell of coffee and pretzels swirling around us. Mark leaned close, his hand warm on my knee. "Do you feel free yet?" I stared at the runway, the snowplows pushing back the storm, and nodded slowly. Not free yet, but close. When the announcement came to board, we rose together, shoulders brushing. I handed over my pass, heard the beep of confirmation, and walked down the jet bridge with a certainty I had never felt. Behind me, the family I had carried for decades was stirring their gravy and polishing silverware, blind to the fact that their Christmas would unravel the moment the bill posted. I stepped onto the plane, the air warm, the seats narrow, and let out a breath that had been trapped inside me for years. What I did not know then was how swiftly the first cracks of chaos would reach them while I was already thousands of feet above the storm. By the time the plane touched down in Palm Springs, the storm that had blanketed Denver felt like a different world. Warm air swept across my face as we stepped out of the terminal, and for the first time in years, Christmas Eve carried no weight of duty. Mark carried our bag with a grin that made him look younger, while I held the reservation printout with my name bold at the top. A driver whisked us through streets lined with glowing palms, and soon we were walking into a resort lobby, draped in garlands and gold lights. The suite door opened to a space bigger than our entire apartment in Denver. Marble floors, a living area with a fireplace and a balcony that stretched out toward the San Jacinto Mountains, dusted with snow at the peaks. Mark popped the cork on a bottle of champagne that had been waiting in a silver bucket. I stepped onto the balcony, the desert night cool and dry, the sky black and endless. For the first time in decades of holidays, I was not an afterthought. I was the center of my own story. I raised my glass when Mark joined me. "Merry Christmas," he said, his voice soft. "Merry Christmas," I answered, and the fizz tickled my throat as I swallowed. We leaned on the railing, laughing quietly, soaking in the silence. My phone buzzed on the table inside. At first I ignored it, but it buzzed again, insistent. I walked in and glanced down. My father's name flashed across the screen. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity pulled my finger across to answer. His voice exploded through the line. "Do you know what you have done? $15,000 charged. You ruined everything. The guests are here, and we cannot even enjoy the night without your selfishness hanging over us." I held the phone a little away from my ear, his fury pouring through. When he paused, gasping for air, I answered evenly. "I am simply enjoying what you already paid for." Silence stretched, broken only by his ragged breathing. Then he roared again, but I hung up before the words could land. Mark watched me, concern flickering across his face. I shrugged, a calm settling into my bones. They finally felt what it was like to be powerless. Not 10 minutes later, my cousin sent a direct message. He had taken a screenshot of my Instagram story, the one I had posted without much thought, just the view of the mountains with two glasses clinking. He wrote only 3 words. It went viral. My chest tightened. In the family group chat, the story had already been shared, spreading like wildfire among relatives packed into my parents' decorated living room. I could picture it. My mother trying to keep her smile fixed, Sophia swirling in her dress, guests whispering, "Why is Natalie not here? How could she afford a place like that?" Every question a needle pricking the illusion they had built. My empty chair at their table was now filled by my presence in a resort they could not control. Mark poured me another glass, his eyes gleaming. They are unraveling, aren't they? I nodded, staring at the glow of the city below the mountains. This was not about revenge that shouted or slammed doors. It was about quiet power, the kind that could not be denied once the truth was visible. The phone buzzed again this time, with a group text I had muted. A wall of frantic messages scrolled by cousins asking questions, uncles teasing my mother typing in short clipped bursts. Sophia finally sent one message in all caps. "You think this is funny?" I set the phone down face first on the table and walked back to the balcony. The night air wrapped around me, and fireworks from a nearby hotel cracked faintly against the dark sky. I leaned into Mark's shoulder, letting the weight of years begin to lift. What none of them knew yet was that this was only the beginning, and the real fracture in their perfect Christmas was still to come. At the Carter house in Denver, the string lights glowed too bright against the heavy silence that had fallen. My cousin Jacob, always too curious for his own good, decided to mirror his phone screen onto the family's new flat screen. My Instagram story flickered into view, the mountains rising dark against the night sky, 2 champagne glasses raised in a silent toast. Laughter erupted from the back of the room, sharp and mocking. Someone muttered that I looked happier than anyone in the dining room. Sophia's cheeks drained of color, her perfect red dress suddenly looking more like a costume than a crown. Linda hissed across the table, her voice like glass breaking. "Charles, you were supposed to keep her off the account." He slammed his hand on the table, silverware rattling. "You are the one who used her profile." The words cracked open a dam. Their voices rose, accusations flying in front of friends and cousins who had never seen the Carters out of control. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, some openly smirking. Sophia tried to regain control, lifting her glass with a brittle smile. "It is not what it looks like," she said, but her voice trembled. Her best friend leaned in to whisper something, and the look of pity on her face made Sophia slam the glass back down, the wine sloshing across the white tablecloth. The illusion of the perfect family, carefully curated for years, was unraveling in real time. Meanwhile, I sat on the balcony of the resort suite, the desert air cool against my skin. Fireworks burst in the distance, colors spilling across the sky. Mark handed me another glass of champagne. "They are probably losing their minds right now," he said, his grin boyish and unrestrained. I leaned against him, breathing deep, my chest lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, I was not afraid of my phone vibrating on the table. I no longer felt chained to the duty of answering their calls or rescuing their disasters. Back in Denver, the shouting grew louder. Linda and Charles's fight spread like wildfire. Guests began pulling out their own phone screenshots of my story, already circulating on group texts beyond the walls of the house. Sophia stormed into the kitchen, her heels striking the floor in angry rhythm. I heard later she accused Linda of sabotaging her, that her dream night was ruined because her sister was allowed to stay tied to the account. Linda, cornered, spat back that Sophia had begged her to use the travel profile because she wanted the best suite, that she had ignored every warning about money. By the time dessert was meant to be served, the family's voices could be heard through the walls. Neighbors later said it sounded like a storm inside. The guests ate quietly, exchanging glances that spoke louder than words. Years of gossip about favoritism and family arrogance now had proof flashing across their screens. At the resort, I stretched my legs across the lounge chair, listening to the faint echo of music from the hotel's courtyard party. Mark snapped a photo of me laughing, the glow of fireworks above. He showed it to me, and for once I did not cringe at being seen. I let him post it, knowing every cousin, every aunt, every neighbor back in Colorado would eventually scroll past it. The quiet satisfaction filled me more than the champagne ever could. Somewhere across town, my parents' carefully crafted image had been shredded by their own choices. Karma had not arrived in flames or fury, but in whispers, in screenshots, in laughter they could not control. And while they tried to patch the holes in their pride, I was miles away, letting the night air wash over me, realizing that the story was far from over. The real reckoning was still waiting, and I could already feel it moving closer. The last morning in Palm Springs was quiet, the kind of stillness that follows a storm. I packed slowly, folding each shirt with a care that felt new. Mark hummed under his breath as he zipped the suitcase. When we rolled it across the lobby floor, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I hardly recognized the woman staring back her shoulders, straight, her eyes steady. By the time the plane landed in Denver, the snow had melted into slush. The city looked different, smaller somehow. Instead of driving back to the old apartment, Mark steered us toward Boulder. We had signed the lease before Christmas, a 2-bedroom on the edge of town with mountain views. It was meant to be our fresh start, and now it felt like the only place I wanted to be. The first night, their cardboard boxes stacked against the walls, Aunt Margaret knocked on the door. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her wool scarf tucked under her chin. She stepped inside and pulled me into her arms. Finally, she whispered, "You chose yourself." I let myself sink into her hug, a mix of gratitude and grief. In the days that followed, I blocked my parents' numbers. Sophia's too. The silence that once would have terrified me now felt like oxygen. For years I had been the family's lifeline, the one they called when bills piled up or crises loomed. Now my phone sat still on the counter and I realized how heavy those invisible chains had been. Mark and I spent evenings planning our wedding. We circled dates on the calendar, springtime in the foothills when the cherry blossoms would bloom. We made lists of venues, menus, playlists, none of which required anyone's approval but our own. Sometimes I caught Mark watching me, his expression soft, as if he could see the weight lifting piece by piece. One evening I stood by the window, the lights of Boulder twinkling against the dark mountains. I thought of all the Christmases I had begged for a place at their table, the endless giving, the silent sacrifices, the humiliations I had swallowed whole. I pressed my palm against the cold glass and whispered to myself that I did not need their table anymore. I could build one of my own. That thought settled deep, stronger than anger, sharper than revenge. It was the borderline I had drawn at last, the line they could never cross again. And as the snow began to fall outside, soft and quiet, I knew the story I had carried all my life was no longer theirs to write. It was mine.